The night I rode into Tallow Creek, I had 11 cents in my pocket and a name worth more than the whole county, and I had hidden the second so well that the first was all anybody could see. That was the way I wanted it. A man learns things, riding broke, that he can never learn riding rich, and the main thing I had set out to learn was whether there was anybody left in the world who would be decent to a stranger who could do nothing for them in return. I had about given up finding one. Then I came down off the saddleback grade in the last gray light, my horse gone footsore and my belly gone hollow, and I saw lamplight in a low house by a creek, and I turned in at the gate because I was too tired to ride past it. I will tell you how I looked, because it matters to the rest. I had a $4 horse I had bought off a freighter to trade down my good one, a saddle with the skirts worn through, a coat that had been rained on so many times it had forgotten it was ever any color, and a week of road dirt and gray stubble on a face that has never been handsome. I looked like exactly what I was pretending to be, which is a saddle tramp with no prospects and no people. I had been 3 counties doing it. In every one of them, I had been turned off porches, set on by dogs, sold a meal for the last coin I would let them see, and once run off a man's place at the end of a shotgun for the crime of asking to fill my canteen at his well. I had begun to think the country was made entirely of men like that, and I had begun to think it served me right, because for the better part of my life I had been one of them. So I was not expecting much when a boy of about 9 came out onto the porch of that house, a lantern held up in both hands, and looked at me the way a boy looks at a thing he has been told to be careful of. "Pa's not here," he said. It was the first lie I heard in that country, and it was a brave one, and I respected it. "No," I said, "I don't expect he is. I'm not looking for your pa. I'm looking to fill my canteen and water this horse, and then I'll be gone." I did not get down. A man who wants to be trusted does not get down until he is asked. The door behind the boy opened, and a woman came out, and that is the moment, if you want to know it, that I have come back to 10,000 times in the years since, the way an old man comes back to the one warm window in a long, cold memory. She was not what the cheap stories call a beauty. She had a strong, plain face, tired around the eyes, her hair pinned up off her neck and coming loose the way it does at the end of a working day, and she had a baby. No, I will get that right, because she would want it right. She had a little girl of about 5 riding her hip, half asleep, a thumb in her mouth. She had a dish towel over her shoulder and flour to the wrist on one arm, and she stood with the boy a little behind her, and she looked at me and my $4 horse and my no-color coat, and she did the arithmetic that everybody in that country had been doing on me for a month. But she came up with a different answer than the rest of them. "You eatin'," she said. I want you to understand what a strange question that was to me by then. Not who are you, not what do you want, not get off my land. You eatin'. Like the first thing a person ought to know about a stranger is whether he was hungry, and the second thing was whether you could do anything about it. "I'm all right, ma'am," I said, which was the truth turned into a lie, the way a proud man does it. "That's not what I asked." She shifted the little girl higher on her hip. "Davy, take the man's horse around to the trough and throw it some of the bad hay, not the good. Then come wash. Mister, there's a bench by the door and a basin. Supper's near on the table. It isn't much. I have eaten at the tables of governors and railroad men. I have had meals brought to me by servants in coats finer than the coat I was wearing that night. I sat down at that plain pine table in that low house on Tallow Creek, and I had a plate of beans and a hunk of corn bread and 1 fried egg, and it is the finest meal of my life, and I knew it was the finest meal of my life before I had finished it, because I had finally found the thing I had ridden 3 counties looking for, and she was standing at her own stove with her back to me, feeding her own children smaller portions than she had given the tramp. And she did not know she had given me anything at all. I noticed that the small portions. I want to be honest, because the whole of what came after turns on it. There was 1 egg, and she had fried it for me. There was not much in that house. I had eaten plenty in my life in places where there was not much, and I knew the difference between a poor table and a poor table where somebody has just given the guest the best of it and is pretending otherwise. The children ate beans and corn bread. The boy Davy looked at my egg once and then made himself not look at it again. And his mother saw him do it and put her hand on the top of his head for a second. Not a word said. And that was a whole conversation between them that I was not meant to hear and heard anyway. "You're welcome to the lean-to," she said when I had eaten and tried to thank her and been waved off. "It's dry. The nights are still cold up here. There's a horse blanket on the wall that doesn't smell too bad." She almost smiled when she said that. "In the morning you can be on your way." "I'm obliged," I said. "I'd be glad to chop you some wood for it or whatever needs doing. I don't take charity I can pay off." She looked at me a moment longer than she had before, and I thought, that is a woman who has heard a lot of men say a lot of things, and has learned to wait for the second sentence, because the first sentence is what a man wants to be and the second is what he is. So I gave her a second sentence. "I mean it," I said. "I'd rather work than be beholden. It's the only thing I've got plenty of." "All right," she said. "There's plenty needs doing." And there was something in the way she said it, flat, tired, with a wall behind it, that told me there was a great deal more needed doing on that place than one drifter could chop in a morning, and that she knew it, and that she had stopped letting herself think too hard about it. I did not know yet that the bank in Sumner's Mill had given her until the end of the month. I did not know about Dor Kearns. I only knew that I had found a decent woman in a hard country, and that I was tired in my bones, and that I did not want to ride on in the morning. I slept in the lean-to under a horse blanket that smelled exactly as bad as she had promised, and I lay awake a long time listening to the creak and thinking about the egg, and somewhere in the night I decided I was not going to be on my way in the morning. I told myself it was because I wanted to repay the meal. That was true. It was just not all of the truth, and I was a long way from ready to say the rest of it even to myself. In the morning I was up before the sun, and I had split a cord of stove wood and stacked it neat against the wall before she came out with the coffee. She stood in the door with 2 cups and watched me set the axe down, and she did not say anything for a while, and then she said, "You did all that before breakfast." "I told you I'd rather work." "Most men that," she said, "say it after breakfast and then they say it again after dinner and somehow the wood never gets cut." She handed me a cup. The coffee was weak. They were stretching the grounds. "I'm Lorna Vesey," she said. "My husband was Joe Vesey. He's been gone 2 years this fall. The boy is Davy and the girl is Ruth. This was Joe's father's place before it was Joe's, and it's mine now, and I mean to keep it mine in case anybody's wondering, which lately a great many people are." "Eli," I said, and I gave her my hand, and I gave her only the one name, and that one word was the largest lie I told her, and I have answered for it since in my own heart more times than I can count. "Just Eli." "Just Eli," she said, like she knew there was a great deal of room behind a name a man won't finish, and like she had decided not to ask, the way she had decided not to ask the night before whether I was somebody to be afraid of. She had a way of granting a person room. It is the rarest quality I have ever found in a human being, and I have looked for it everywhere since, and found it almost nowhere. "Mrs. Vesey," I said, "you said there's plenty needs doing. I'll stay on a few days and do it. I'll take my keep in the lean-to and a plate at your table and no wages, and when the work's done I'll move along. That's a square trade, and it puts neither of us beholden." She thought about it. A woman alone with 2 children does not take a strange man onto her place lightly, and she should not. And I respected that she weighed it instead of grabbing at the help. "A few days," she said at last, "and the children are not to be out of my sight with you, and you sleep in the lean-to, and the first time you give me cause, you're gone, and I've got a greener over the door that Joe taught me to use." "Yes, ma'am," I said, "that's exactly how it ought to be." And so I stayed, the richest man in the territory, on no wages, in a lean-to splitting stove wood for a widow who thought she was doing the charity. I learned the place fast, the way you learn a place when you mean to save it, although I had not yet admitted to myself that I meant to save it. It was a good little outfit gone thin. There was bottomland along Tallow Creek that would have grown anything, and a stand of grass on the bench above it that would carry more cattle than she was running on it, and a sound house, and a sound barn that wanted only a few days of a man's labor to be sound for another 20 years. What it did not have was money, or men, or time, and it had run out of all three at about the same moment, which is how places die. Joe Vesey, I pieced together, had been a good man and a hopeful one, which is a dangerous thing to be on the frontier. He had borrowed against the land to buy more cattle the year before a hard winter, the way hopeful men do, and then the hard winter had come and taken half the cattle, and then a fever had come through in the spring and taken Joe, and left Lorna with a note at the bank in Sumner's Mill, 2 children, a thinned-out herd, and the whole weight of a place that wanted 2 strong people to run it and now had 1. She had run it for 2 years on grit and on stretching the coffee. She had paid the interest every quarter by selling something, a wagon, a milk cow, her husband's watch. I found out later, though she never said so. And now the note was coming due in full at the end of that month, and she did not have it and was not going to have it, and everybody in Tallow Creek knew it, including the man who had been waiting 2 years for exactly this. His name was Dorr Kearns, and he owned the Box K, which was the big outfit in that part of the country, by which I mean it was big for that part of the country, which is to say a fraction of 1 corner of my own holdings, though Kearns did not know that and I was not telling. Kearns had wanted the Vesey bottomland for years, because Tallow Creek was the only dependable water on that whole stretch of the Saddleback, and a man who held it held the country, and a man who held the country could squeeze everybody else off it at his leisure. He had offered Joe a price for it once and been turned down, and he had offered Lorna a worse price twice since and been turned down harder. So now he was simply waiting for the note. He had an arrangement, I came to understand, with the bank. When the place went up for forced sale at the end of the month, and it would, because she could not pay, there would be exactly 1 serious bidder, and the price would be a robbery, and it would all be perfectly legal, which is the cruelest kind of theft there is, the kind with papers. I learned the shape of all this in pieces over the first 2 weeks, mostly by keeping my mouth shut and my ears open, the way you do when you are pretending to be nobody. I learned it from the way the Box K riders came down the creek road too slow when they passed, looking the place over like men, appraising a thing they had already decided was theirs. I learned it from the morning we found the fence cut along the bench and 40 of her cattle drifted off onto Box K grass, where, by a marvelous coincidence, the Box K boys had already gathered them and were holding them, all ready to claim a trespass fee that would have eaten what little cash she had. I learned it from the day I rode into Sumner's Mill on her old gray to buy nails, and the storekeeper would not extend her $1's credit, and looked at me sidelong when I asked, and said, "Lo, you workin' out at the Vesey place. You're wastin' your time, friend. That ground spoke for." And I learned it most of all from Kearns himself, the day he rode into the yard. He came with 2 of his men, on good horses, in a good coat, and he did not get down, which told me what kind of man he was, because a man who will not get down in another person's yard is a man who does not believe the yard belongs to them. Lorna came out onto the porch with the greener held down along her leg, not pointed, just there, and Davy came and stood by her, and little Ruth peeked from the doorway, and I came around from the barn and stood off to the side with a fence rail in my hands like a man who had just happened to be carrying it, and let Kearns see me without making anything of it. "Mrs. Vesey," Kearns said, touching his hat in a way that was meant to look like courtesy and was the opposite. "I'll come straight to it the way I always do. The note's due in 9 days. You can't make it. We both know you can't make it. There's no shame in it. Joe got in over his head. Lots of good men do. But there's no sense you and these children getting put out in the road with nothing either when I'm prepared to be generous." He named a price. It was about 1/3 of what the place was worth. "Cash in your hand this week, and a wagon to carry your things to wherever you've got people. You'd be doing right by your children taking it. You'd be a fool not to." I watched her face. I have sat across the table from hard men in big rooms, men who buy and sell other men's lives for sport, and I have learned to read a face the way a gambler reads a hand. And I watched Lorna Vesey, with a third of the value of everything she had in the world dangled in front of her, and a shotgun against her leg, and her dead husband's grave on the rise behind the house and her 2 children at her side, and I watched her not even think about it. "No," she said. "Now, Lorna, it's Mrs. Vesey, and the answer is no, and it was no the last 2 times, and it'll be no the next time, so you can save the ride." Her voice did not shake. That is a thing I want set down because it is the thing that decided me. Her voice did not shake. "This is my children's land. Their father's buried on it and his father before him. You'll get it over my dead body or not at all, Mr. Kearns, and I don't intend to die this month." Kearns let the friendly mask drop for just a second then, and I saw the real thing under it, and it was not a man who wanted land. It was a man who could not stand to be told no by a woman with a shotgun and a stretched pot of coffee, a man for whom the wanting had stopped being about the water years ago and become about the winning. "You'll lose it anyway," he said, and the courtesy was gone out of his voice. "At the sale, for less, and nobody'll thank you for being stubborn." His eyes came over to me then, sizing me, the fence rail, the gray stubble, the no-color coat. "Who's this?" "Hired man," Lorna said. "With what money?" "My business." Kearns looked at me a moment longer, and I gave him the flat, empty look of a man with nothing, which was a look I had spent a month perfecting, and he dismissed me the way you dismiss a fence rail. "You ought to draw your wages and ride on, mister," he said to me. "There's not going to be a place here to draw them from much longer." Then he reined his good horse around and rode out of the yard he had never gotten down in, and his 2 men rode after him, and one of them looked back at the cut fence on the bench and grinned, so I would know they knew I knew. I stood there with the rail in my hands, and I felt a thing rise up in me that I had not felt in a long while, and it was not the cold, appraising anger I was used to, the anger of a man who is about to ruin somebody in a quiet office with a stroke of a pen. It was a hot, plain fury, the kind a man feels in his arms. It would have been the easiest thing in the world for me to end Dorr Kearns. I could have ridden to the nearest telegraph and sent 4 words, and had the note bought up by sundown and Kearns himself called in on a dozen debts I could have found or made by the end of the week, and broken him, and never raised my voice. The power to do it was sitting in my saddlebag in the form of who I was, and I stood there and I did not do it, and I have thought a great deal since about why. It was because of the egg. I know how that sounds, but it is the truth, and I have never found a truer one. If I had ridden off to the telegraph and come back the savior with my checkbook and my name, I would have learned nothing, and worse, I would have ended the only thing in my life that had ever come to me clean. She had been good to me for nothing. The minute she found out I was Markham of the Hatchet, and that name meant something even up there on the saddleback, the way weather means something, the minute she found that out, I would never again in my life know whether a kind word from her was for me or for the name. I had been chased by women and men, both for that name, since I was 25 years old. I had been married once briefly to a woman who, I learned too late, had been good to me for it, and only for it, and the discovering of that had put the wall around me that I had been living behind for 15 years, and had built the road tramp disguise to climb over. I was not going to throw away the one place where the name had not gotten there first, not yet, not until I understood it. So I did the harder thing, which was to stay nobody. I went to her that evening after the children were asleep, and I said, "I'd like to stay on past the few days. Through the trouble anyway. You could use the hands, and I've got nowhere I'd rather be." It was the truest sentence I had said to her, and I dressed it up as charity going the other direction so she could take it. She was at the table mending a shirt of Davy's by a low lamp, stretching the lamp oil the way she stretched everything, and she did not look up for a moment. "You heard him," she said. "There's not going to be wages." There weren't going to be wages anyhow. I work for the keep. You set those terms yourself. You heard the rest of it too. There's not going to be a place. 9 days, she bit off the thread. You be staying on to help me lose. There's not much a man can do against a bank and the Box K both, Eli. I'm not such a fool I don't know that. I'm staying because I won't give Dor Kearns the satisfaction of my walking off before he's made to throw me off. But I'm not going to win. I'd be a liar to let you think otherwise, and I won't have you staying on some notion you can save it. You can't. Nobody can. I will tell you what I almost did then. I almost told her. The words came right up into my mouth. I am not a poor man, Lorna. I am the furthest thing from a poor man. Let me make the note go away, and I held them. And I have asked myself 100 times whether holding them was the wisdom I told myself it was, or just a rich man's vanity, wanting to be loved poor before he was loved rich. I think now it was some of both, but I held them. Because I looked at her, mending a boy's shirt by a stretched lamp, refusing to lie to me even to keep a hand she needed, and I thought, she would take it as the price of the help. She would let me stay on the strength of the hope, and she would let herself lean. And then if I were the kind of man who turns out to be lying, and how would she know I wasn't? She would have leaned on a lie and lost worse for it. She had had enough of leaning on hopeful men. So instead I said the only honest thing I could say while staying nobody. I don't stay because I think I can win, I said. I stay because you fed a stranger his fill the night you were short yourself, and gave him your dry lean-to, and you didn't know one thing about him, and you did it anyway. A man doesn't ride off from that, Lorna. Not the kind of man worth keeping around anyhow. Whatever happens at the end of the month, you won't go through it alone, and you won't carry the heavy end by yourself. That much I can promise, and that much I'll keep. The rest of it we'll see. She looked up at me then, and looked at me a long time, the loose hair down at her neck and the lamp making the tired in her eyes soft instead of sharp, and something passed over her face that I had been waiting weeks to see, and had told myself I had no right to want a kind of giving way, just a little, the wall coming down a hand's breadth. Joe used to talk like that, she said quietly. Like a thing being right was reason enough to do it. And then, because she was who she was and would not let either of us sit in something soft for long, she went back to the shirt. There's the south fence once the whole line walked before the sale, she said. If you mean to stay, start there. I started there, and the next 9 days were the best 9 days of my life, which is a strange thing to say about 9 days spent watching a good woman get robbed, but it is the truth. We worked. We walked the south fence and we mended it. We brought the drifted cattle back off the Box K grass, the two of us and the boy Davy, who rode like a little burr and would not be left behind. And when the Box K boys came to make trouble about the trespass fee, I stood my gray across the gap in the fence and said a few quiet words to them. The kind of words a tramp says. No threat in them at all that a man could point to, only a stillness, and they decided 40 head of another man's cattle were not worth the morning and rode off. We ate at the table, all 4 of us, and I learned the children. Davy was 9 going on 40, carrying a weight he was too young for, the man of the place since he was 7, and what he needed more than anything was permission to be 9, which I gave him in small doses, teaching him to throw a loop and to whittle, and once, against his mother's better judgment, to fire the greener at a fence post, which knocked him flat and made him the proudest boy in the territory. And little Ruth decided after the 3rd day that I was hers. She would not be talked out of it. She took to riding on my shoulders out to the barn of a morning, and falling asleep against me of an evening, a thumb in her mouth, while her mother told me the history of the place by the low lamp. I had not held a sleeping child in my life. I am not ashamed to say it undid something in me that 15 years of money had welded shut. And Lorna, I will not make a long thing of it because she would not want me to, and because the kind of love a man finds at 40 is not the loud kind that the young have. It is a quieter and a surer thing, more like coming home than like being struck. It grew in the ordinary ground, in the passing of a coffee cup and the working of a fence, and the way she laughed once, surprised out of herself, when Ruth said something only a 5-year-old could say, and how the laugh changed her whole face, and I caught her seeing me see it, and we both looked away like a couple of fools. It grew in the evening she found me reading her late husband's worn Bible by the lamp, the only book in the house, and did not say anything, only brought a second cup of the weak coffee and sat across from me and let me read, and the silence between us was the best company I had had in 15 years. It grew. And the whole time, the thing I knew, and she did not sat in my chest like a stone, getting heavier, because every day she was good to me was a day she was good to a man who did not exist, a man named just Eli who owned a $4 horse, and I knew the reckoning of it was coming as surely as the end of the month. It came on the 28th, 2 days before the sale, and it came worse than I had let myself imagine, and it is the part of this I am least proud of and most grateful for, both at once. Kearns came back. He came in the evening this time with 3 men, after he had had 2 days to think about being told no in front of his riders by a widow with a shotgun, and there is no animal on earth meaner than a small man who has been made to feel small. He did not bother getting down this time either, but he was past pretending at courtesy. "Sales in 2 days," he said. "I'll make my offer one last time, and it's lower than before because you've cost me 2 rides. Take it or come the sale you'll have nothing, and I mean nothing. I've spoke to Tarbox at the bank and there'll be a deficiency on the note above what the place brings, the way these things go, and a deficiency's a debt that follows you, Mrs. Vesey. It follows you to wherever you run with these children. You'll be working it off the rest of your life. Or you can take my hand right now and walk away clean. Your choice. I'm a businessman." It was a lie about the deficiency, or near enough to one. He had arranged for the place to be undersold so that there would be a deficiency, a debt manufactured out of nothing to chain her to him. And I knew it was a lie because I knew exactly how that kind of paper theft is rigged, having watched lesser men than me do it and having, God forgive me, in my hard years let it be done in my own name once or twice without asking the questions I should have asked. And I watched it land on her. I watched the fight in her, that had not bent for the cut fence or the trespass fee or the first 2 offers, finally find the one place it could be hurt, which was not herself. It was the children. The thought of carrying a manufactured debt for the rest of her life, of Davy and Ruth growing up shackled to Dor Kearns's spite, that was the thing that made her go pale and made her hand tighten on the porch rail, and Kearns saw it, the way a cruel man always sees the soft place, and he leaned toward it. "Think of the children," he said softly, and made it filthy. And I stepped off the porch into the yard and I said, in my own voice, which is not a tramp's voice and never was, "That's enough, Kearns." He looked at me. They all looked at me. Lorna looked at me, and I felt her looking, and I knew that the next words I said were going to change everything between us, and that there was no longer any way around it, and I found that I was glad, the way you are glad when a thing you have dreaded finally simply arrives. "There won't be any sale," I said, "and there won't be any deficiency because there won't be any forced auction at all because the note is going to be paid in full tomorrow morning when the bank opens, every cent of it and the back interest with it, and I'd advise you to be there to watch, Kearns, because it's the last business you'll do in this country." I looked at him steady. "My name is Markham, Eli Markham. I run the hatchet down on Pinto Creek. You'll have heard the name even up here." He had heard the name. I watched it hit him, watched the blood go out of his face the way it had gone out of Lorna's a minute before, because the name Markham meant, to a man like Kearns, a man who owned banks the way Kearns owned a bank clerk, a man whose cattle covered more country than Kearns had ever ridden across, a man who could, with 4 words on a telegraph, find every debt and weakness in the box K and call them all in on the same morning. He had been waving a manufactured deficiency at a widow. He had been doing it in front of the one man in the territory who could buy and sell him before breakfast and not feel it. I watched Dor Kearns understand that he had walked his whole spite-built scheme straight into the side of a mountain, and I will not pretend I did not enjoy it, because I am not a saint, whatever the rest of this might make me sound like. "You," Kearns started. "I'd ride on," I said gently, which was the most frightening way I could have said it, and I had learned long ago that it was. "And I'd think hard in the next while about whether the box K can stand a close looking over of its papers, because it's going to get one. Now get out of this yard. You've never once got down in it and you've lost the right to." He went. There is no satisfaction in describing it. He went the way a bully always goes, with his mouth working and nothing coming out of it, and his 3 men went after him looking at me sideways the way men look at a thing they had taken for a fence rail and discovered was a loaded gun, and the dust of them hung in the yard a while and then settled, and it was over, the Kearns part of it, just like that. A month of fear undone in 2 minutes by a name. That is what a name like mine can do. That is the thing I had spent a month trying to ride away from, and it had caught up with me at last, in that yard, in front of the only person whose opinion I had come to care about in 15 years. And then I had to turn around and face her, and that was the hard part, and the Kearns part had only ever been the easy part. She was standing on the porch with the shotgun still down along her leg and the children behind her, and she was looking at me, and her face was not the relieved face I had let myself hope for in some shallow corner. It was a still, closed, hurt face, and I understood it before she said a word, because I had spent 15 years making that face on other people. She was doing the arithmetic again, the arithmetic she had done the first night with the $4 horse, only she was doing it backward now, going back over every kind word and every shared coffee and every evening by the lamp, and recounting them, and not knowing any more what any of them had been. "How long," she said, her voice was very quiet, "how long have you been who you are?" "The whole time," I said. There was no use in anything but the whole truth now. "I rode in nobody on purpose, Lorna. I've ridden 3 counties nobody on purpose. I was, and I found it was hard to say, harder than the name had been. I was trying to find out if there was a single soul left in the world who'd be decent to a man who couldn't pay them back. I'd about decided there wasn't. And then you fried me your last egg. You let me feed you my children's supper," she said, and now there was a shake in her voice, the shake that had not been there for Kearns, and it cut me worse than any anger could have. "You let me give you the lean-to and feel sorry for you and stretch the coffee thinner so there'd be enough, and the whole time you could have bought this whole valley and never noticed the money gone. You let me pity you. You let me—" She stopped. She would not say the last of it, but I heard it anyway, hanging in the cold air. "You let me start to love you, and I didn't even know who you were." "I did," I said. "And it was wrong, and I won't say it wasn't, and I'd undo the lie if I could and keep only the rest. But hear me out, Lorna, and then if you want me off this place I'll go tonight and I'll still pay the note in the morning and you'll never have to see me again, and that's a promise too. Will you hear me out?" She didn't say yes, but she didn't go in and shut the door either, and I took that for the room she always granted, the room she had granted a dirty stranger on a $4 horse, and I used it. "I've been chased for that name since I was a young man," I said. "Married for it once, by a woman who never once looked at me the way you looked at the wood I'd cut before breakfast, like the thing I'd done was the thing that mattered, not the thing I had. When she died I found out the truth of it, what I'd been to her, and I built a wall a mile high, and I stopped trusting any kindness that came at me, because every kindness that had ever come at me had come at the money behind me, not the man in front of it. 15 years I lived like that. A rich man surrounded by people, lonesome as a post. And it got so bad I couldn't tell any more whether there was a real thing in the world, or whether everybody was just the woman I'd married, so I put on a tramp's coat and I rode out to find out. And I found out, Lorna. The country's mostly hard and mostly mean to a man with nothing. I've got the dog bites to prove it. And then I came down off the saddleback half-starved, and a woman who had nothing herself, a woman 2 days from losing everything she owned in the world, looked at me and didn't ask me who I was or what I wanted. She asked me if I'd eaten. I had to stop a second. I am not a man who shows much, and it cost me. "You're the only person in 15 years who was good to me," I said, "for nothing, knowing nothing, wanting nothing. You'll never know what that is because you've got no idea what it is to be wanted for a thing instead of a self. You fried me an egg and gave away the warm spot to a man who could have bought your county, and you did it because I was hungry, and that was reason enough. That's the rarest thing on this earth, Lorna Vesey. I've looked for it everywhere money can reach, and money can't reach it, that's the whole trouble, and I found it in a linta that smelled like a horse. So no, I didn't tell you. I was a coward about it, and selfish, because I knew that the minute you knew the name, I'd never again be sure whether you were being good to me or to it. And I wasn't willing to lose the one clean thing I'd ever. And there, I did stop, because the next word was a word I had no right to say, not standing in her yard having just lied to her for a month. She was quiet a long while, the creek talked. Somewhere a nighthawk went over. Ruth behind her said sleepily, "Mama, is the bad man gone?" And Lorna said without turning, "Yes, baby, the bad man's gone." And I did not know in that moment whether she meant Kearns or whether she meant me, and the not knowing was the worst 2 seconds I have ever spent. Then she said, still quiet, "You could have told me the second day. You could have made the note go away the first week and saved me a month of nights I'll not get back." "I could have," I said, "and you'd have leaned on me, and you'd have never been sure of me, and you'd have spent the rest of your life wondering if the man who saved you was a man you could trust or just a man who'd bought you out of a hole. And there's a name for a woman who marries the man who paid her debts, Lorna, and it's a name you'd have heard in Sumner's Mill the rest of your days. I wasn't willing to do that to you either. I made myself say it plain. I wanted you to know me first. The man in the lean-to, the wood and the fence and the coffee. I wanted you to know that man and decide about that man before the name ever got near you, so that whatever you decided, it'd be clean and you'd be sure of it your whole life, and nobody could ever take it from you with a word in town. That much I did right, even if I did it crooked. You know me, Lorna. You've known me 3 weeks and you know me better than anybody's known me in 15 years. The money's just money. It can fix the note and it can run Kearns out of the country, and after that it's not worth a damn, and I'd give every dollar of it to have you look at me one more time the way you looked at that woodpile." I stopped. I had said all of it. There was nothing left to say and no way to make her say anything, and that is the thing about handing a person the truth. You have to then stand there with your hands empty while they decide what to do with it, and you have surrendered every power you had. And a man like me, who had spent his life never surrendering any power at all, found that it was the most naked he had ever been in his life, standing in that dark yard with the cut fence valley around us, and the dead husband's grave up on the rise, and my whole heart laid out on the ground between us where she could step on it if she chose. She stepped off the porch. She came down the 2 steps and across the bare dirt of the yard, and she stopped close in front of me, closer than she had ever stood, and she looked up into my face the way she had looked up into it the first night, doing the arithmetic, and I made myself hold still and let her, the way you hold still for a thing you cannot control. And whatever sum she came to it slow, the way she did everything, weighing it true. And then she reached up and she put her flower-rough hand flat against the gray stubble on my jaw, the jaw of a man who had let her pity him, and she said, in a voice gone soft and rough at once, "You damned fool, you could have just told me you were lonesome." And that was the whole of it. That was her forgiving me and her choosing me, and her telling me I'd been an idiot, all in the one breath, which is exactly the kind of woman she was and is. I put my hand over her hand against my face, and I bent my head down to hers, and I will draw the curtain there, because what passed between us in that dark yard belongs to the 2 of us and to nobody reading this, and because she would have my hide for putting it in. I will only say that little Ruth, who had crept out onto the porch, announced loudly to the night, "Mama's kissing the woodman," and that we both started laughing and could not stop, and that Davy came out to see what the noise was and stood there grinning like he'd known how it would all come out the whole time, the way children somehow do. I paid the note the next morning. I rode into Sumner's Mill on my $4 horse, in my no-color coat, and I walked into the bank where Tarbox the banker had been keeping a chair warm for Dor Kearns, and I laid out who I was, and I have to tell you it was the most fun I'd had with the name Markham in all the years I'd carried it. I paid the note in full, the principal and the back interest, and I took the paper, and I had Tarbox mark it satisfied in his own hand, And then I did one thing more which I want set down because it is the heart of the whole matter. I did not put the deed in my name. I could have. A lesser man, even a well-meaning one, would have bought the place outright and handed it to her as a gift, and called it love, and never seen the chain in it. I had the deed left exactly as it was. Lorna Vessey's name. Her place free and clear, her own, the way it had always been, only now with no note hanging over it. I paid off her debt. I did not buy her land. There is a world of difference between those two things, and I had learned the difference the hard way in 15 years of buying things and people, and I was not going to get it wrong with the only thing that had ever mattered. The place was hers. It is hers to this day. When I asked her to marry me, and I asked her proper on the porch, hat in my hand, a week later, after Kearns had sold out of the country and gone, and the whole valley had let out the breath it had been holding for 2 years. When I asked her as a man asks a woman who owns her own ground and owes him nothing and can say no and lose nothing by it. That mattered to me more than I can make you understand. She had to be free to turn me down. It was the only way I could ever be sure, after the lie, that her yes was clean. She said yes. She made me sweat a good long minute first, looking out at her own land, her own free land with the morning on it. I think she enjoyed it, the wretch, and then she said, "Well, somebody's got to keep an eye on you. You can't even tell a woman your last name," and that was her yes, and it has been her yes for 31 years now. We were married in the fall, on the rise above the house, near Joe's grave, because she wanted Joe near it and I would not have had it any other way. A man who has had a good thing taken from him does not begrudge another man having had it first, and Joe Vesey had been a good man, and his children carry his name still, and I have raised them as my own and loved them as my own and never once tried to make them forget him. We kept the Vesey place on Tallow Creek. We did not move down to the Hatchet, though it was 20 times the outfit. She said her children's roots were in this ground, and I had spent 15 years finding out that an outfit 20 times the size is just 20 times the lonesome if there is nobody in the house worth coming home to. I run the Hatchet from up here by letter and by the men I trust, and I have given a good deal of it away besides, over the years, to causes she points me at, because it turns out that money you cannot be loved for is at least money you can do some good with, and she has a clear eye for who needs it. Davy runs the bottomland now. He is a grown man with sons of his own, and he is a better hand than his father was, and his father was a good one. Ruth married a doctor down in Sumner's Mill and brings her bobbies up the creek road every Sunday. And the first thing the littlest one does, every Sunday of her life, is climb up onto my shoulders to ride out to the barn. And I am an old man now and my knees are not what they were. And I carry her anyway every Sunday, because I learned long ago what it costs a man to refuse a child who has decided he is hers, and what it gives him to say yes. There is a coat on a peg by the door of the house on Tallow Creek. It is a coat that was rained on so many times it forgot it was ever any color. Lorna keeps it there. She will not let me throw it out, and I have stopped trying. Every now and again, when somebody new is at the table, a new hand, a suitor come courting Ruth's girls, a banker once who came up the creek thinking he was going to be clever with a Markham and went away a great deal humbler. Every now and again, when somebody is at the table sizing us up the way people do, Lorna will catch my eye, and she will not say anything, but she will glance over at that no-color coat on its peg, and I will glance at it too, and we will both think the same thing. And it is this: that she fed a hungry stranger the best of what little she had, the night she had every reason in the world to feed nobody but her own, and that she did it knowing nothing about him and wanting nothing from him, and that it was the truest thing I have ever seen a human being do, and that I came down off the Saddleback grade 31 years ago a rich man and a stranger to my own heart, and that a poor woman with one egg made me, for the first time in my life, worth more than my name. I would not trade that coat for the whole of the Hatchet. I have told her so. She says the coat smells like a horse. She is right. It is the best thing I own.